It was 19 degrees in the parking lot of the Hartley discount store. The stray dog huddled against the cinder block wall was shaking so hard it could not stand. Not one of the grown adults hurrying past in the December dark had slowed down. The girl knelt in the dirty snow in nothing but a thin sweater. She wrapped her purple jacket around the trembling animal, easing it over the bony shoulders. She tied the sleeves carefully under its chin so it would not slip off. "There," she whispered. "Now you're not alone." She stood up in the freezing cold in just her sweater, hugging her own thin arms, looked around the lot to see if anyone had noticed, to see if anyone would help. What she did not see was the man standing 15 feet behind her. He was 6'2" and built like a door. He had been a United States Navy SEAL for 20 years, and he had watched the entire thing without moving a muscle. There was something on his weathered face that had not been there in a very long time. He had seen courage take 100 shapes in a dozen countries. He had never once seen it look like an 11-year-old girl giving away her only coat to a dying stray, and in that frozen parking lot unseen, he made a decision that was going to change both of their lives. Before we go on, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay with it until the very end. We read every single one, and what this little girl was hiding and what this SEAL did about it will stay with you long after the video ends. His name was Wyatt Brennan, and he was 44 years old and built like a man who had spent 2 decades being the one others counted on to come back for them. He stood 6'2", lean and dense through the shoulders, with sandy hair gone gray at the sides cut down close, and a face creased deep from squinting into hard sun in hard places. There was a thin scar through his right eyebrow, and a way he had of standing in an open space, with his weight slightly forward, ready even now, even here. His hands were big and scarred and surprisingly gentle, the hands of a man who had done terrible necessary things and never lost the ability to be careful. His eyes were a pale, sea-washed gray that read a space the instant he entered it, the exits, the hands, the distances. Out of a reflex, 20 years of service had pressed so deep into him that he no longer felt it happening. They were not cold eyes, whatever strangers assumed at first glance. They were the eyes of a man who had carried other men's lives and lost some of them anyway, had decided that the only thing to do with that was to keep showing up. He was not unfriendly. Grief had simply made him quiet, the way it makes some men quiet. He moved through the world with a banked, contained stillness, the look of a man with nothing left to prove, and a great deal left to mourn. And he had just watched a freezing child do the bravest thing he'd seen in years, and something in his chest that had been closed for a long time had come open. He had served 21 years in the United States Navy and retired a senior chief petty officer out of the SEAL teams. He had deployed more times than he kept track of. Iraq in the worst of it, Afghanistan across the long middle years, other places he had signed papers agreeing never to name. He left the service with a back full of hardware and a chest full of names he still said to himself at night. 2 years ago he had lost his wife, Sarah, to a cancer that moved faster than anyone promised, the quiet house they'd bought in Hartley, Michigan. For the retirement they never got to share had to become a place he mostly left the lights off. He had a grown son stationed overseas and a dog and a workshop and a great deal of silence. He had come to the discount store that night for a bag of dog food and nothing else. He had not expected to be reminded, in a frozen parking lot, what he was still for. The dog at his side was named Max, a 7-year-old German shepherd, 88 pounds of dark sable and disciplined muscle, coat running black along the spine and burning to amber at the legs, clipped notch in his left ear from a fragment on a compound clearance years ago, and the controlled, economical way of moving that takes years to build, never reacting to noise, only ever to meaning. He had been Wyatt's combat dog. Wyatt had fought the program the better part of a year to bring him home. Max had been the one warm living thing in that dark house since Sarah passed. He was not a pet. He was the partner who had pulled Wyatt out of more than one bad night, the steady heartbeat in an empty kitchen, when the little girl in the sweater had knelt to wrap her coat around the stray. Max had done something he almost never did with strangers. He had pulled gently toward her, sat down a few feet away, watched her with his ears soft and his whole body relaxed. The posture a trained dog takes only around people he has judged, some way past human understanding, to be good. Wyatt had learned to trust that judgment with his life. The dog had vouched for her before either of them knew her name. Hartley was a small blue-collar town in the cold middle of Michigan, a main street of half-empty storefronts and a shuttered mill and neighborhoods of small frame houses with snow piled to the windowsills. It was the second week of December, and the deep cold had settled in for the season, the kind that turns the air sharp and makes every breath visible and gets into the bones of anyone without a warm place to be. The discount store sat at the edge of a strip mall under a buzzing sign, its light spilling yellow onto a lot of frozen gray slush. It was the kind of ordinary American place where ordinary people hurry past one another in the dark, heads down against the wind, and where, on this particular night, every single one of them had walked past a freezing dog and a coatless child and seen nothing at all. The woman the child belonged to, on paper anyway, was named Vivian Crowder. She ran a licensed group home on the north side of town called the Crowder Family Home. Crowder was 56, neat and respectable, and good with a clipboard. A woman who had been taking in foster children for 19 years and collecting the monthly state stipend for each one, plus the clothing allowances, the food assistance, the special supplements for the kids who'd lost parents. The state sent the money. Vivian Crowder kept most of it. The children in her care slept 3 to a room under thin blankets with the thermostat, and locked at 58, ate the cheapest food in the smallest portions, and wore whatever the church donation bins provided, while Crowder drove a newer car every couple of years and took her cruises in the winter. She passed every inspection because she had a friend in the placement office who gave her a courtesy call before the surprise visits because she knew exactly how to clean up a house and a child for an afternoon. "These children would be in a ditch without me," she liked to say, warmly to anyone who'd listen. "I give them structure. The world isn't kind to kids like these." She believed she was untouchable. For 19 years, she had been exactly right. The girl's name was Hannah Mills, and she was 11 years old. She carried herself with more dignity than her circumstances had any right to produce. Her father had been a soldier, Specialist Daniel Mills, killed by a roadside bomb in his second deployment when Hannah was 6, and her mother had died of an aneurysm 2 years after that. Hannah had passed through 3 placements before landing at the Crowder family home, where she had learned to take up as little space as possible and ask for nothing. She did not cry where anyone could see. She kept her grades up. She looked after the littler kids in the house, sharing her food with the youngest ones when Crowder wasn't watching. Purple jacket she had just tied around a freezing stray was not, in fact, just a jacket. It was the last thing her mother had ever given her, bought a size too big so she could grow into it, the only warm thing she owned, and the only thing in the world that was truly hers. She had given it to a shaking, dying animal in a parking lot because she knew, better than any adult walking past, exactly what it felt like to be cold and small and certain that no one was coming. She understood the dog completely. It was why she could not leave it. Wyatt crossed the lot slowly, Max at his knee, crouched a respectful distance from the girl so as not to frighten her. "That was a brave thing you just did," he said quietly. Hannah went tense the way a child goes tense when an adult notices them, ready to be in trouble. But the big dog beside the man wagged his tail once and lay down in the snow. The stray, under the purple jacket, had stopped shaking and was looking up at her with its eyes half closed. Something in the man's gray eyes was not dangerous at all. "He was going to die out here," Hannah said simply, as if it explained everything, which it did. Wyatt looked at the thin sweater, the bare hands going blue, the careful knot she'd tied in the sleeves. "And what about you?" he said. The girl just shrugged, the practiced shrug of a child who has learned that her own cold is not anyone's emergency. Took off his own coat, a heavy thing built for the worst weather on earth, and draped it over her small shoulders before she could refuse. Swallowed her whole, and he said, "We're going to get this fella somewhere warm. You hungry?" And Hannah Mills, who had not been asked that question with any kindness behind it in a very long time, looked at the man and the dog and the stray she'd saved, nodded once, and that nod was the beginning of everything. Over a cheeseburger she ate too fast and a hot chocolate she held with both blue hands. The story came out in pieces the way it does with kids who've learned not to tell. The cold house, the locked thermostat, the donation bin clothes, the little ones she fed from her own plate, the advance warning before the inspectors came. She did not say any of it as a complaint. She said it the way she'd say the weather, because to Hannah it was simply the shape of the world. Wyatt Brennan listened without his face changing much, the way he'd been trained to take a brief. What he was hearing arranged itself in his mind into something with hard edges. He took the stray to an after-hours vet that night and paid the bill without blinking. Hypothermia, malnutrition, but it would live. And then he made 2 phone calls. The first was to a child welfare investigator named Denise Park, a woman he'd met once through Sarah's hospice work, who went very quiet when he described the Crowder family home and then said the name Crowder in a tone that told him she had been trying to get inside that house for 3 years and had never had a child willing to talk. The second call was to a lawyer. He was not, he had decided, going to let this go. The crisis came when Vivian Crowder realized one of her children had been talking. Hannah was returned to the home that night by the rules. A stranger could not simply keep a foster child, however warm his coat, and Crowder met her at the door with a face like a closed fist, demanding to know where the purple jacket was. Hannah explained. Crowder's fury was cold and total. She took away what few privileges the child had, told her she was an ungrateful, troublesome girl who would be moved to a worse place if she ever embarrassed the home again. Made it clear that no one would believe a word a problem child said against a respected woman with 19 years of clean inspections. For one long night it looked airtight. Crowder had the system, the paperwork, the friend in the office, comfortable certainty of a woman who had won this fight against frightened children many times before. Hannah lay in the cold dark of a room she shared with 2 younger girls, certain she had ruined everything, certain that the kind man and the good dog had been a thing that happened to other children and not to her. But across town, the stray she had saved was alive and warm under a heat lamp because of her, and Wyatt Brennan was awake at his kitchen table with Max's head on his knee, and Denise Park was pulling 3 years of files, and a decision had been made that no locked thermostat was going to survive. It was the dog who moved first, 2 days later, when it all came to a head on the Crowder family home's front steps. Wyatt arrived with Denise Park, with a county sheriff's deputy, and with a state licensing investigator who had been handed 3 years of complaints, and a child finally willing to be heard. Vivian Crowder came to the door with her clipboard smile already on, ready to explain, ready to charm, ready to mention how much these children needed structure. And Max came up the steps ahead of Wyatt and stopped squarely in front of her, hackles standing in a ridge down his spine, and let out a single low sound that froze the smile on her face. He did not lunge. He simply stood between Vivian Crowder and the doorway, full of children behind her, and would not move. The deputy's hand drifted and then settled, because the dog wasn't the threat. The dog was the verdict. Wyatt stepped up beside him. Senior Chief Wyatt Brennan, United States Navy, retired, he said, and he did not raise his voice, and the quiet of it was worse than any shout. 21 years. SEAL teams. I've seen a lot of people take things that didn't belong to them, in a lot of countries. Never thought I'd come home and find someone doing it to orphans. He nodded toward the cold house behind her. The state's been sending you money to keep these kids fed and warm and clothed for 19 years. You kept it, locked the thermostat at 58, and dressed them out of the donation bin, and let a Gold Star child stand in a parking lot in December in a sweater until she gave even that away to a freezing dog because she's got more decency in her than you've shown in your whole life. He let it land. Mrs. Park has 3 years of files. The licensing board is in your kitchen right now, reading your thermostat and your pantry and bank statements. It's over. Crowder's face came apart. These children are troubled, they lie. You have no idea what I deal with. That girl has always been a problem. She looked past them for the deference that had protected her for 19 years and found Denise Park already inside with the other children and the deputy unmoved. A neighbor who'd come out onto her porch in the cold to watch, and nowhere in any of it the thing she was looking for. You can't prove I did anything but my best for kids nobody else wanted, she said, smaller now. Your bank statements will, the licensing investigator said, and stepped past her into the house. What the investigation turned up over the following weeks was 19 years of stolen care. Funds meant for food and heat and clothing, siphoned off a rotating cast of children who had no one in the world to check. Nobody spoke for a long time after the deputy read Vivian Crowder her rights on her own front steps. A woman across the street put her hand over her mouth. The children came out onto the porch one by one, blinking, wrapped in the coats the deputies had brought, and the youngest of them ran to Hannah and held on. Wyatt watched Crowder folded into the back of a county car, and he felt no satisfaction in it, only the flat tiredness of a wrong being set right that should never have been allowed. He turned away before it was finished and knelt down in the snow in front of an 11-year-old girl who was shaking again, this time not from the cold, and he said, "You did this. Every one of these kids is warm tonight because you were brave in a parking lot." Max pressed his big head against Hannah's chest, and she put her arms around the dog. And finally, she let herself cry. By the following summer, the windows of a quiet house in Hartley were open to the warm air, and there were 2 dogs in the yard. Hannah Mills had a bedroom painted the color she chose, and a place at a table where someone asked her every single day if she was hungry and meant it. The road there had not been simple. There were caseworkers and a judge and months of paperwork. Denise Park had walked every step of it. But Wyatt Brennan, who had spent 20 years going back for people, had gone back for one more. The court had agreed that a decorated Gold Star child and a widowed seal who could not stop looking out for her were against every odd, exactly the family each of them had lost. The stray Hannah saved had lived. She'd named him Lucky, and he and old Max had become inseparable, the noble combat shepherd and the scruffy little survivor asleep together in a patch of sun. Vivian Crowder pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts of fraud and child neglect and went to state prison for 7 years, ordered to repay every dollar. The Crowder family home was shut down and the children placed in real homes. Denise Park used the case to force new oversight rules on every group home in the state. And on a warm evening in July, Wyatt Brennan sat on his porch and watched a girl who had once given away her only coat throw a tennis ball across a green yard for 2 happy dogs, laughing, warm, unafraid. And the house was not silent anymore, and he understood that she had rescued him every bit, as much as he had rescued her. Sometimes the bravest person in the parking lot is the one nobody is looking at. The world rushes past the cold and the small and the quiet, heads down, certain that someone else's suffering is someone else's problem. It takes a child kneeling in the snow to remind us what we've forgotten. That warmth is meant to be given away. The measure of a person is what they do for a creature who can do nothing for them in return. Hannah Mills gave a freezing stray the last warm thing she owned, not knowing anyone was watching. And that is the only kind of goodness that counts, the kind done when no one will ever know. But someone is always watching. God has a way of placing the right person 15 feet behind us at the exact moment our small, unseen mercy is about to be answered with a larger one. The coat you give away in the cold is never the end of the story. Sometimes it is the very thing that brings you home. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the smallest act of kindness, done when no one is watching, can change a life, maybe even your own. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and tell us this: you ever given something away in the cold? Or watched a child teach a grown-up what mercy looks like? Your story may be exactly the light someone else needs tonight. And if you believe in compassion, courage, the families that find each other against all odds, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. May God bless you. Protect your family, watch over every cold and forgotten child in this world, and remind you always, no kindness you offer is ever truly unseen.